This is Mike Dilke with the Relaxback UK show. On the Relaxback UK show, we explore all kinds of health topics, so keep listening and enjoy the ride. Hi, and thank you for joining me, Mike Dilke, on the Relaxback UK show. Please remember, if you're listening to a podcast version, to like and share. And if you have any topics that you would like to be covered in the future, you can contact me with some suggestions. And I think probably the best way to do that is via email. My email address is mike@relaxbackuk.com. That's mike@relaxbackuk.com. We start today talking guts.
Yeah, so what we're seeing is a link between gut health and diseases beyond the intestinal tract. So, cancers, obesity, even disorders of the brain like Alzheimer's and mental health disorders like anxiety and depression.
We've always been told a healthy body is a healthy mind, and that's what they say. And it seems now that a healthy gut is a healthy body and a healthy mind as well. Jordan Hayworth from the Functional Gut Clinic talks to us about guts. Then COVID has got us used to doing health tests at home, and Frederick Manduka from Company Newfoundland has lots of other tests that we can do at home as well.
Just to go through them, we have iron deficiency, vitamin D, thyroid, kidney function, bowel health, menopause, and male fertility as well.
So please do stick around for a great show. Thank you. Jordan Hayworth is a clinical physiologist from the Functional Gut Clinic, and he specialises in guts and digestive disorders. And it seemed like a good first question for him would be, actually, what is a clinical physiologist?
A clinical physiologist is essentially a scientist that specialises in the investigation of certain parts of the body. So I am a gastrointestinal physiologist, so I specialise in the investigation of digestive disorders.
How did you get to be one of them, Jordan? It sounds like, I'm sure you didn't wake up one day and think, I know, I've got to be a clinical physiologist specialising in guts.
Sure. So I always wanted to be a scientist and researcher, but my area of interest was immunology. So looking at the immune system and its role in things like autoimmune diseases and cancer. However, when I graduated university, there was a job opportunity to become a gastrointestinal physiologist, which sounded interesting. And I'm so glad that I took it now, because not only is gut health, fundamental to many other conditions, but there is such an overlap with the immune system, and that we now know that up to 70% of our immune system lies within the gut. So there's that crossover that I was always interested in.
Okay, fantastic. And actually, I've spoken to people on this show about cancer, actually, and gut health. I'm sure there are lots of different cancers and areas of that, but it was breast cancer and gut health.
Yeah, so what we're seeing is a link between gut health and diseases beyond the intestinal tract. So, cancers, obesity, even disorders of the brain like Alzheimer's and mental health disorders like anxiety and depression. But what's interesting with cancer is we're seeing that the microbes in our gut, or the gut microbiome as we refer to it collectively, can actually predict how well you will respond to cancer treatment. So how well you respond to immunotherapy in particular.
Right. I mean, this is just phenomenal, and it's all pretty new, isn't it? I mean, I'm sure scientists have been working on it for a long time, but it's sort of started to hit the news in the last few years, really.
Sure. If you think about the gut microbiome, it was never really considered a fundamental part of health. But in the last sort of decade, we're realizing it's, because it's so strongly linked to so many other diseases, that it's almost like an organ in itself. It's really fascinating stuff. And we've still got a long way to go, but it's an exciting time.
All right. So I normally wait till the end of the interview to ask the kind of unfair, impossible question, but let me just jump in with it now then. I mean, how can that possibly be? I mean, our gut is where the nutrients are taken out of the food for our body, and then it gets
Yeah.
rid of it. Now, how can that possibly relate to Alzheimer's, cancer, all the other stuff you mentioned?
Sure. So it seems to be that the strongest link is to the gut microbiome. So the gut microbiome refers to the community of microbes in our gut, and there's trillions of them living inside of us. That includes bacteria, yeasts, viruses, even parasites. Okay, and they are
Yeah, parasites isn't always a bad thing, is it?
exactly. No. There's some parasites that we're starting to see might be linked to positive health outcomes, like being more lean and better sort of metabolic health. So what happens is that community, that gut microbiome exists in sort of a balance, like an ecosystem. And if we see that ecosystem out of balance or disrupted, whether that's having too many of the bad kinds of microbes or whether it's just a lack of diversity, so not many different species in there, those are the sort of things that we're seeing strongly linked to the development of Alzheimer's disease, anxiety, depression, autoimmune disease, and metabolic disorders.
Right. So I wasn't planning to ask you this, but continuing on the theme of unfair, difficult questions, different people around the world, or even different people in different parts of the same country, eat very differently, have really quite different diets. Has it been noticed, more prevalence of, I don't know, Alzheimer's, where the diet is particularly this or that?
Yeah, so we're seeing a higher prevalence in the more westernized countries, the ones that tend to have a diet that is higher in things like ultra processed foods. So those are the foods that you find in supermarkets with long ingredients lists or that have changed dramatically from the original form. So the example I always use is corn on the cob versus corn tortilla chips. But in countries that eat a diverse, whole food predominant diet, so the Mediterranean diet or a Japanese diet, they're inversely associated with Alzheimer's disease. So they have much lower prevalence compared to the West.
Okay, all right. So, right, no question, the gut is important for all kinds of different things. And lots of people do suffer from, just not feeling quite right in the guts.
Yeah.
It's like every other person seems to have irritable bowel syndrome. Is that really the case, or is it just what people say because they've heard someone else say it?
Well, it's quite a surprising statistic that 40% of the UK population experience digestive problems, that are akin to irritable bowel syndrome. So these are things like bloating, excessive wind, flatulence, abdominal discomfort, changes to the bowel habit like diarrhea and constipation. So that's almost 1 in 2 people. But irritable bowel syndrome is a specific condition that affects more like, around 1 in 10. But everyone can experience some digestive discomfort. That is quite normal, for example, to feel bloated after, you've eaten a large meal or you might have had one too many drinks. That's normal. But if you're getting that regularly, then that's when it's time to maybe speak to a doctor to see what's going on. But surprisingly, almost 1 in 2 people who report these symptoms don't actually speak to a doctor about them. And it's quite important to speak out because, we need to make sure that there's nothing sinister going on. So it's important that we sort of break the poo taboo, so to speak.
Break the poo taboo. All right.
Yeah.
That sounds like a good phrase. Let's just look at you say, make sure there's nothing sinister. All right. Yeah. What do you mean by that? What could potentially be a little sinister?
So there are sort of alarm symptoms that we need to look out for, or red flags. So that would be blood in the stool. That would be unintentional weight loss. So losing weight, when you're not really changing much. It might be feeling fatigued quite often when, almost like you can't get out of bed or you find it difficult to exercise. So these are things where if you're getting digestive discomfort alongside those, you should definitely go and speak to a doctor about them.
Okay, and it potentially might be cancer. Is that
Well, that's it. So it's especially when it comes to gut health. So like blood in the stool can be a sign of potentially cancer or inflammatory bowel disease. So it's definitely worth speaking to the doctor if you notice that. And with things like bowel cancer, it's on the rise. So there are a lot more people developing bowel cancer, but it's one of the easiest to treat if it's recognised earlier. So the sooner you get it found out, the more likely you are to be treated.
Early diagnosis is the key, like many of those things. All right, so look, back to the gut, and so it seems like we need our guts to keep us healthy. So what would she be doing? What should we be doing? Because presumably how the state of our gut depends on what we put in it, what we eat and drink. So what should we, what should we do?
So the first thing I always say is to actually not do anything too drastic. So don't remove things from your diet unnecessarily. It's quite trendy to go gluten-free or grain-free or dairy-free. But unless you have an actual allergy to them, this can be detrimental to your gut health in the long run. Because if I go back to the gut microbiome, so a diverse gut microbiome with lots of different species in there is key to gut health, which means you need to eat a diverse diet. So aim to eat as many different kinds of plant foods as possible. The science suggests aiming for around 30 different plant foods each week. And that sounds like a lot, but this includes whole grains, beans, nuts, seeds, herbs and spices. So season your food well, and you can even cheat a little bit. So things like granola, which contains lots of different nuts, seeds, grains, or you can make your own coleslaw. And it also includes things like coffee, tea, even red wine to some extent. And another thing that is usually popular at the moment, but we're starting to see a lot of gut health benefits from it in the research, are fermented foods. So these are things like yogurt, kefir, which is a fermented milk, sauerkraut, fermented cabbage, sourdough bread. So what happens with these foods is they're cultured with beneficial bacteria and yeast, which helps to change the sort of matrix of that food, and it's easier to digest, but also what we're seeing with the research is might have more benefits to gut health.
Okay. You mentioned sourdough bread there. Now, obviously, you know, the microbes are very much needed in the rising of the bread and all that, but then you bake it. Doesn't that just kill them all off?
It does, but what happens with sourdough is because it's fermented for longer, it becomes easier to digest. So for people with irritable bowel syndrome, a lot of them will feel an improvement when they go gluten-free. But what we know from the research is it's not actually the gluten causing the problems in most people with IBS. Yes, there's a small percentage of the population with celiac disease who need to go gluten-free. But for those with IBS, it's not the gluten in wheat. It's these compounds or carbohydrates that are difficult to digest called FODMAPs. And with sourdough bread, the bacteria break down those FODMAPs, which means that they don't get fermented in your gut. So you're less likely to get bloated. You're less likely to get stomach cramps.
Okay. All right. So the key really is a balanced diet with a varied balanced diet. And what was that number of different?
So 30 is the goal, 30 is the tally. But remember, this includes herbs, spices, drinks like teas, coffee.
All right. Yeah. All right. Now, if you're doing all that, but you still got issues, whatever it might be, and it seems like a lot of us do, you know, for whatever reasons. Presumably stress brings it on as well, does it?
Sure, yeah. Stress is a massive silent gut health wrecker. So stress, you know, if you're constantly stressed, you tend to be in the more fight or flight response. And this significantly impacts digestion. And so it can, what we're seeing is that stress can also disrupt the balance of microbes in the gut as well.
Right. So you could be eating all the right things, but be stressed. What about if you're eating all the right things, but actually you have to have a course of antibiotics? I mean, that can knock out the bugs in your gut, can't it?
Yeah, antibiotics obviously wipe out a lot of the gut microbiome. And what happens is we're seeing people who tend to have recurrent use of antibiotics. They're more likely to go on and develop some of these conditions like autoimmune diseases. Another another big thing that people forget about is food poisoning as well. So food poisoning dramatically changes the dynamic of the gut microbiome. So it's what can we do if, obviously sometimes we need to take these antibiotics, not to overprescribe them for things like the flu because they don't necessarily work for that. But when they are needed, what can we do to try and recuperate that gut microbiome? So we're seeing a little bit of evidence that maybe taking a probiotic alongside the antibiotics can reduce some of the side effects like diarrhea. But it's probably, comes down to diet and how we can replenish those microbes that are lost.
Sure. All right. So put those to one side. We're not suffering from stress. We haven't taken antibiotics. We're eating okay, but we've still got problems. So we're obviously unlucky in our gut health, our gut life. But any suggestions? I know you've got something that you're keen to chat about.
Sure. So some people will have, a good balanced diet, as you alluded to, but they're still getting issues. And that's where they might need a helping hand with a supplement that supports gut health. So I've worked closely with Juvia, which is a digestive balance supplement. And it was developed by some of the leading investigators in gut health. It contains a unique natural ingredient called enzyme-rich malt extract, or ERME. So it's made from 100% sustainable barley, and it's full of digestive enzymes. So what we found was that in 3/4, we did a research study, and in 3/4 of the people that took it saw an improvement in bloating, abdominal discomfort, and had more regular bowel movement. So the way that Juvia works is, because it contains those digestive enzymes, it helps to break down some of those tricky to digest carbohydrates. And carbohydrates are the favorite fuel source of bacteria in your gut, both good and bad. So if you do have more of those bad guys and they're fermenting the carbohydrates, you're going to get a lot of gas produced. You're going to get a lot of bloating, flatulence. It can also change the bowel habit. But Juvia, by taking it with meals, you can help to break those down. So what a lot of people do with IBS or digestive issues is they tend to cut foods out and they feel better. Okay, so the example I always go back to is gluten. So you cut gluten out, you feel better, but it's not actually the gluten, it's these tricky to digest carbohydrates in the wheat. By taking Juvia, it allows you to have more food freedom. So you can eat more of those foods that you have been avoiding because the digestive enzymes help to break them down.
Okay. You mentioned a couple of things there that I just want to pick up on. You said, okay, some research has been done to such that this enzyme, what was it? Enzyme regulated?
Yeah, so it's an enzyme-rich malt extract, or ERME. So that's the ingredient in Juvia. So you're probably familiar with malt extract. It's used in baking. It's been used for centuries, used to make things like malt loaf. But this is a unique formula that contains a lot of digestive enzymes that break down carbohydrates.
And so this is derived from barley.
Yeah.
And so how do you get it from barley?
So I think it's it's part of the malting process. So the way they sort of dry grains for making hops and beer and that kind of thing.
That sounds exciting because you use that for making beer. So can you not just drink a load of beer and you'll be fine?
Unfortunately, no. Unfortunately not. So the malt extract, the ERME, contains these unique digestive enzymes, which are key to sort of rebalancing the gut microbiome.
Okay. So then the other question that I always ask when people say, oh, yeah, research has been done on it. So, okay. So is this peer-reviewed, published papers kind of research? Can I go and have a look at it?
Yeah. So there's the study that I led, which was published last year in the journal Gut. So that was in...
That sounds like a very appropriate journal.
Yeah, it's one of the leading journals in, gut health with one of the largest impact factors. But there's ongoing research with it too. So there's some larger trials going on in Australia and some other places in the UK. So it's a really exciting product backed by science. And like I said, we saw dramatic improvements in over 3/4 of the people who took it.
Right. So do you just take it for a little while, or if you need it, it's like you've got to take it forever? How does it work?
Yeah. So what we're seeing is we do sort of a 6-week intense phase of it. So you take it twice per day with meals, and that's what we call the rebalancing phase. Some people actually, for the first couple of weeks taking it, might feel not actually better, but feel a little bit strange. And that's as those microbes in the gut sort of replenishing. And then during the study, we noticed that maybe like week 3 or week 4, people start to see, a really good improvement. And then people can then adjust the dose to see what works for them. So maybe they reduce it from twice per day to once per day.
Okay. So it's suggested that you keep on taking it though, probably.
Yeah. So we see it as an adjunctive or supportive thing with a normal diet. Yeah.
All right. So this is research that you did. You wrote the paper.
Yeah.
Okay. How many people did it take into account? What was the end number?
So ours was a relatively small study because it was one of the first. So it was in 20.
Right.
But like 3/4 of them saw an improvement, which was really fascinating. So that's paving the way for larger trials. And we're getting, one of the most important things that we're getting is really good feedback from the users who are using it already.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. Okay, all this is very good news. If people want to find out a little bit more about this ERME, which then goes into the product called Juvia.
Yeah.
That's how it works?
That's right, yeah.
Okay. How can they find out a bit more? And if they want to have a look at the paper that you published, are there some links to that as well?
Yeah, so I think if they firstly go to the Juvia website, which is juvia.me, so that's JUVIA.me, and I think our research is linked on the site as well. But if they're struggling to find that, then they can go to our website, that's thefunctionalgutclinic.com, and we publish all of the research that we've done from there.
Okay. So did you do the research in combination with a university or at the clinic?
No, at the clinic. So we were the main sponsor. So we're a clinic that's based in Manchester, London, and Cambridge. But we have a massive, R&D focus. So we run lots of clinical trials. We've done some for probiotic companies, prebiotic companies, and obviously Juvia as well.
Yeah. Okay. Absolutely fascinating. This is because it's like every day I come across someone who complains of having, their guts in turmoil. So it's obviously something that really does affect a lot of people. I'm kind of fortunate, I think, in that it doesn't really happen to me. So I'm just one of life's lucky ones. But I know a lot of people do suffer from this. So I think this kind of thing could potentially be useful and help a lot of people. So Jordan, many thanks for chatting.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
The next section is about home testing for all kinds of different things. My guest is Frederick Manduka, and he's co-founder of Newfoundland Diagnostics. And I asked him if people really are getting more interested in their health and doing tests at home and looking after themselves in general. And if so, what is driving this whole change in people's outlook and behaviour?
I think it's a very interesting space at the moment. We've seen across the board a rise in people wanting to take health into their own hands, wanting to understand more about their bodies, the symptoms they might be feeling. I think we've had a real wave of Google Doctors, which is you type your symptoms into Google and it come back with some quite scary things that's not particularly helpful to anyone, not people themselves or GPs that they then go and see. And having a more nuanced approach where people now very familiar with lateral flow tests, thanks to one of the only things, thanks to the COVID pandemic, you can now see people wanting to have.
Is that's searching for a positive in the COVID pandemic, isn't it?
Exactly. It's very difficult.
There are probably a couple more, but they're few and far between. So we'll take what ones we can.
Exactly. And one of them is probably people feeling more familiar with doing a test themselves at home and reading the result and seeing whether it's positive or negative, drawing those similarities to a pregnancy test. And now you can do them with our tests from everything to thyroid function, to bowel health, to prostate cancer, to vitamin D levels, iron deficiency levels, and even the menopause. And I think that's a real shift. And making them affordable is obviously a huge part as well. We know that we're in a cost of living crisis, and there's been a lot of inflation in the last year. And having a test that's under £10 that you can just do in your own home regularly and get the result yourself in 10 minutes with an over 95% accuracy has a lot of appeal.
Right. So you mentioned a few tests there, kind of now we're used to them on the back of doing the COVID test. So can you mention them again? What sort of tests are there available? You sort of went through a little list there, but just revisit that.
Yeah, so we have a partnership with Tesco's where in over 600 stores we have our range of tests. And just to go through them, we have iron deficiency, vitamin D, thyroid, kidney function, bowel health, menopause, and male fertility as well.
Right. And also, I must admit, I took a sneaky peek at your website before we started, and you've got a couple that are soon to be available.
Yeah, so we have the prostate cancer test, which is measuring your PSA levels, something that's really exciting. Again, there's nothing quite like it in the market where you can take an affordable test to see if you have an elevated PSA level, which is obviously a lead indicator of prostate cancer. And early screening is just so vital for both bowel cancer and prostate cancer, and so significantly increases the chances of survival post-diagnosis. And then we also carry on. The urinary tract infection test coming soon, and also the HIV test coming soon.
All right. So are these tests, are they done on blood, on urine, on poo, or yes to all of that?
Yeah, it varies based on each one. So most, I would say, are blood, but some are urine. For example, the kidney function is urine, menopause is urine. The only one that's a stool sample is the bowel health test. And then, so urine samples, again, with menopause, kidney function. Yeah. So it varies based on each test.
Yeah. So testing your urine or your poo, because, that's meant to come out. So at home, I can see that, we can do that. Blood's meant to stay in. So is that not a little trickier doing a blood test at home?
Yeah, it poses challenges, but we feel very confident that we've covered off all of the challenges, and it's had significant regulatory review. All of these tests are heavily regulated both by the MHRA and by the notified bodies in Europe. And for the blood test, you're provided a lancet in each test, and it's just a pinprick into the side of your finger. It's not painful, and then we provide a plaster and an alcohol wipe as well. So it shouldn't pose too much of a challenge.
Okay, so it's a prick test. You're not sticking something in and sucking blood out.
No, it's not.
You wouldn't trust us like to do that, would you? I'm hoping.
I wouldn't trust myself to do that. So no.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So now, with the COVID test, there was a lot of talk in the media about false positives and some of the issues that causes. Now, actually, you mentioned it earlier in the chat, but any test has a percentage of the time where it might not work for a whole host of reasons. Do these tests have, or what is the chance of a false positive in these kind of tests?
Yeah, so the key really is how well the test is done. In a laboratory setting, or when the test is done correctly, the chance of a false positive is minimal, less than 1% for most of our tests. It's called, the scientific term would be specificity of the test. The issue is when the test isn't done correctly. And I think that's why we've put such an emphasis on not just putting the instructions for use leaflet in the test, which can often be quite a long bit of paper with lots of small print and, isn't always the easiest to navigate, but also a leaflet in each test, which really simplifies it with pictures, and then also putting the videos of how to use the test in our app and also on our website. It just minimizes the chance of the test being done incorrectly. We saw obviously with the COVID test, people were even putting Coca-Cola or lemon juice in a lateral flow test to generate a false positive, so they wouldn't have to go to work or to school. And I know that's an extreme example, but It's the idea that, again, if the test isn't done properly or a contaminant is found in the test or something goes wrong, then it could generate a false positive. But actually, when the test is done correctly, it's extremely small.
Right. Okay. Human error, that's the issue that you can't control, or people just doing slightly different things. But all right. Interesting. If people get answers to these tests, and it might be that they get the right answer or they've done it incorrectly and they get false positive. My thought might be, to some extent, actually, this could be causing a lot of worry and a lot of anxiety. And because sometimes you go to a GP and he says, okay, we'll do the test, or actually, I don't think we need to do the test. And there could be a host of reasons why they say that. But are we generating a lot of anxiety for sort of no real reason here?
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting argument, and I think it revolves around what you're actually testing for. I think with regards to health anxiety, there are a lot of tests which encompass absolutely everything. So there's a blood test that you can do. You'll pay between 100 or 80 to 100 pounds, and it will test for absolutely everything, including things like elevated sodium levels or different, minute biomarkers in your blood. And then you'll see a yellow or a red, and you think, well, I need to go and see a doctor. But actually, an elevated sodium level in your blood is not a reason to see a doctor. And that could generate some anxiety. But if you look at our tests, for example, the bowel health test, which is probably the most extreme test you could get a positive result to. Actually, if there is blood to be found in your stool, it's an invisible speck of blood. It's called fecal occult blood. It generally could indicate an issue with your bowel health, but also specifically a polyps or a cancer. Any doctor, any GP on the NHS would immediately advise you to see a doctor if you find fecal occult blood in your stool.
Right. And
it's one of those things where actually screening someone early reduces the chance or increases the chance of survival to a multiple that is a no-brainer, that everyone would want to screen for fecal blood at an earlier level. And that test just doesn't exist at the moment. I mean, the NHS are sending out tests once every 2 years if you're over the age of 50, but having a test that you can do quickly at home regularly to screen, especially if you feel symptoms, is definitely a good thing, definitely a good thing to have available.
And actually, for the bowel one, the NHS is having a drive currently to get people to actually do the test that is sent to them. So, yes, I'm sort of with you on that one.
Absolutely,
so,
yeah.
From these range of tests, if you, I don't know, you maybe you do the iron deficiency test and you take it and you think, oh, goodness, okay, I've got a low score. It says I'm iron deficient. If you take these tests to your GP, is he going to take you seriously? Because hopefully you will with the bowel cancer one, because you just mentioned that. But there's a lot of other tests here. Is the GP going to say, "Oh goodness, right, we must do something about this," or would he just say, "Well, yeah, don't worry about it. Try eating a bit more red meat," or what's going to happen?
Yeah, so it completely depends on each test. Like you say, I think in terms of the GP's response to a lateral flow test reading, it's really helpful. These tests are used in hospitals all over the country and all over the world. And it's one of those things where 70% of all doctors' decisions are made on the back of a diagnostic result. So going to a doctor and saying, look, I've taken a test, it says that my vitamin D levels are low, it's significantly more efficient than going to the doctor and say, I feel a bit run down, because that could be 100 different things. Whilst if you say, look, I've had a low vitamin D result reading, or I've had a low iron deficiency reading, the doctor will then process that information and say, well, it could be related to this. You might be able to fix this from a lifestyle change. And when the doctor puts the whole picture together, it actually is a really important piece of the puzzle that he can then take away. It may save, 2 appointments into one, which takes, waiting times down from the NHS, and also takes a lot of the stress of then having to wait for a diagnostic result on the NHS.
Yeah. Okay. So you think it's likely to, help the NHS? The NHS won't get overrun with the tested well, if you like, the walking tested well.
Yeah. I think that's a big difference between the, all or nothing blood tests where you test for 100 different things. Then you've got someone who's perfectly healthy that is then concerned about something. But because these tests are very specific and very targeted, it's only for example, a lower vitamin D level. And actually, most people taking these tests are already aware that they may have an existing problem. For example, a lot of people know they may have an underactive thyroid. And taking a thyroid test means they can then go to a doctor and say, look, I know I have an underactive thyroid. I've tested positive for a low TSH, which is the hormone that your thyroid produces.
Sure.
And then the doctor can say, okay, that's really useful information. This is what I recommend. It just makes the whole process a lot easier. And we also have much more information on our app and our website and in our leaflets explaining exactly what the next steps are. And they're all taken from official NHS advice and NHS doctors as well.
Okay. All right. No, I can see that actually, because when I first thought of this, I thought, is this kind of the case of a little knowledge is a dangerous thing? And because in some instances it really can, because we all know someone who's going on about their health and, oh, I'm not well today. It drives everybody nuts. But if this is a little more targeted and pinpointed, I can see that certainly helping. So, Frederick, I often ask unfair questions. And I've got one saved up for you. As I said, this probably is a bit unfair, so just a warning. But I do like data, all right? I numbers and figures and proof. And do you have any data of lives saved? Someone did one of these tests and thought, all right, this looks a bit odd. I better go to the doctor. And the doctor said, right, you were right to come. You need to go to hospital tomorrow, or, go on a course of treatment that dramatically saved them something horrible or even saved their life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wish we did have that data to hand. That would be wonderful. We funnily enough, get more of the individual stories. So someone saying they've actually taken our bowel health test and it came back with a positive, and they would have had absolutely no idea they had bowel cancer. Then they had a screening and they had a treatment even before stage 1 bowel cancer, and it saved their life. The chance of surviving bowel cancer when you have a late diagnosis are about 10%. It's really difficult. But when you have an early diagnosis, it's above 65%. So it just makes a huge difference. And we do hear these stories all the time. And we heard another story of someone who took our thyroid test, who had an underactive thyroid, who couldn't get an appointment with a doctor about their thyroid for 6 months. And they suspected the entire time they took one of our tests. They immediately knew, and then they were able to fast track a treatment course. And it's stories like these that really give us motivation to and proof of concept that we know we're doing something that's really helpful and beneficial to the UK population.
So in that case, if I was the thyroid person and I took the thyroid test, if I called my GP and spoke to a gatekeeper and said, look, actually, I've just taken a test and I know I've got a problem, would they take that seriously? Or before long, everyone's going to be trying that one, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, especially because with the thyroid, they will know, okay, the pituitary gland in the brain is not sending enough of the thyroid hormone to the thyroid, and that's what's causing the problems. They'll know immediately what to do. The question is, obviously, it will depend on each GP surgery, where you are in the country, for how long it will take to get that treatment. But in terms of in a doctor's mind, they will know exactly what the problem is once the test has been explained to them, and once they know the result. It's as simple as that. But again, obviously wait times vary on the NHS, but having this information could save 6 or 7 months of waiting around, not sure what to do, because actually, unless you do a test, the symptom overlap is just so wide and varied that it's very difficult for a doctor to actually know what to do. And they have such pressing concerns. They might think, immediately, is this cancer? Is this going to cost someone's life? Well, no. So maybe let's not take X course of treatment, or fast track it, whilst again, having a diagnostic result just makes the pathway so much clearer for both the doctor and patient.
Sure. I mean, I'm definitely in favour of people being more involved in their health rather than just dumping it on the doctor. You fix me. Because I think, well, probably all over the world, but certainly the great British public has suffered from that of, the NHS will fix me. It's up to them. I don't need to get involved. But now we are, it seems, have an appetite for getting a bit more involved. How can we know when we should take one of the tests that you have available? Because there's a wide range of tests, so presumably there's a wide range of symptoms. Over to you. How
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a fair question. I think it comes under two categories. One is if you have symptoms and you don't know why you're having the symptoms, we have a website that details exactly what symptoms would correlate to each test. And that's where you can take 2 or 3 tests comparing with the symptoms from our website and say, okay, well, actually, it's not a low vitamin D level. It's not an iron deficiency. It's actually an underactive thyroid. For example, it could be that kind of thing. And then the other category is people who know they have an existing problem. So, for example, someone who knows they struggle to maintain their vitamin D levels can now take a test for £8 off the shelves at Tesco and test every 5 months, every 6 months, every 3 months, however they feel necessary, to say, okay, my vitamin D levels are sufficient now, or actually they've dipped. Why is that? What can I do to increase them? And actually having that monitoring is so vital, especially at that price point, because the other vitamin D level tests are well above £40, £60, £70, or you have to wait through the NHS pathway, which again can take such a long period of time. There's actually a new thing entering into the market that in the overall toolkit is really helpful. We're not trying to, say this is a golden sort of bullet or anything, or just takes out everything. Actually, this is just a very small part of an overall healthcare strategy for the UK that can just add and give people a new option to complement the other already existing services, like going to see your GP or taking a full laboratory test. It's just a component, a tool in the toolkit, so to speak.
Sure. So something you mentioned there, you said that the prices are coming down. Is that because there's a change in the technology, or that more of these tests have been made and used, so there's economies of scale? Because not long ago, home tests were actually pretty bloody expensive. But, you're saying these tend to be under £10. So this is a dramatic change.
Yeah, that's something we've really wanted to push, is being almost a disruptor within the healthcare industry and, lowering the prices for these tests. I think a lot of the reasons why the test prices were so high is because it was actually a different test. You would take a blood sample, you would then package it up, you would send it in the post, it would then go to a laboratory, and they'd then run the test, and then they'd email the result back to you. But that, again, takes 48 to 72 hours to get your result back. You then have to send it in the post. It's much more expensive. And then all your data is obviously logged externally. Whilst this, you control your result, you control all your data, no one's storing it, and you get the result in 10 minutes at home. And that's why it's, again, just a new thing for the UK market. And Tesco's has been obviously groundbreaking in being the first major retailer to stock these range of rapid tests with us.
Yeah, okay, interesting. I've got a good friend who he really likes sport, and he thinks outside of the box a lot. And I said, look, I'm talking to this guy about home testing. What should I ask him? And he thought for a moment. He said, look, where's it all going? Are we going to get to the point we have like a continuous readout where you get up in the morning and you stick your finger in something and it says, oh, this morning you could have these problems? And he said you could take that one step further, because, okay, I'll tell you the whole story. It's slightly bonkers, but, he loves football. And he was saying, could it get to the point where a footballer could get information that, okay, you're at risk of an injury if you train today. Don't train today. Because these footballers, they're worth a lot of money. If they're out for a week or two, this is big news. So how far is all this going? And is this continuous readout, a possibility for the future?
Yeah, it's interesting where it's going. I think, to be completely frank, the technology for diagnostic testing, at least rapid diagnostic testing, is quite far off with injury prediction. But I know with the way sports science is going, that they're feeling like they can predict hamstring injuries, for example, for a footballer based on how many sprints they've done and recording it on their computers. And that's all very interesting. But I think in terms of rapid testing, we want to give people as many options as possible. We're certainly not pressuring anyone to take a test unnecessarily. It's just there as an option for people who want to take health into their own hands and see, for example, I've been feeling this. I know my body. Is it this? And then they can get a result that's affordable and quick right there in front of them. And that's just something we want to provide and offer as best a service as possible. I think where it goes will be really interesting. I know there are lots of things that people, would love to test for. There's a lot of, for example, athletes, perhaps like your friend, who want to know their testosterone levels before they train. And there are other forms of diagnostic tests which can do that. The rapid lateral flow tests don't have a test for that right now, but again, in the future they might, and that might be something really useful for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think the whole topic is very interesting, and I can see it. being more and more popular and people getting really excited about it. So if people are listening to this little chat and thinking, yeah, actually, I'd like to find out a bit more about this, even take one of these tests, what should they do next? I'm sure, point them to a good source of information.
Yeah, absolutely. So the best source of information would be our website, www.newfoundland.io. And that provides all the information regarding symptoms, next steps, what each test tests for, and then has all the tests on our website. The other option as well is to go to your local Tesco's. It's not in the Tesco's Expresses, the small stores, but any of the larger stores, it should have our full range of tests in the health and wellness section. So that's what I'd recommend to do. And yeah, try out the test for yourself. We'd love to hear as much feedback as possible for what people think. And yeah, it's a new option to take a rapid lateral flow test for lots and lots of different health markers.
Good. All right, Frederick, thank you very much indeed for chatting. Very interesting.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. Really appreciate it.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
Thank you very much to my guests on this week's show, and they were Jordan Hayworth talking about guts, and Frederick Manduka of Newfoundland Diagnostics talking about home health tests. And of course, a big thank you to you for listening, and have a healthy week. Until next week.
That was the Relaxback UK show with me, Mike Dilke. Thank you for listening, and please do join us again next time.